Hello, and welcome to Horns of a Dilemma, the podcast of the Texas National Security Review, TNSR. I'm Doyle Hodges, Executive Editor of TNSR. In this episode of Horns, we listen to a discussion by Ms. Emily Harding, a Senior Fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and formerly the Deputy Staff Director of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, about Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. Many of us recall Robert Mueller's investigation surrounding the allegations made around that election. But Harding goes into detail on the far more expansive, detailed, and bipartisan investigation headed up by the Senate Select Committee. As she discusses, they investigated not only the efforts of Russia surrounding contacts with the campaigns and involvements on social media, but were also sparked to investigate to what extent Russian operatives may have tried to explore the election mechanism and machines used in different jurisdictions. The committee arrived at the conclusion that there was no interference with vote tallies, but their work helped to inform the security measures that made the 2018 and 2020 elections much more secure against that mode of interference. Ms. Harding is introduced by Professor Stephen Slick of the Intelligence Studies Project at the University of Texas, Austin. Let's listen in.
Good afternoon. Hello. We call the room to order. I think that's my job. All right, thanks. Good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Steve Slick. And on behalf of the Intelligence Studies Project, Clements Center for National Security, and the Strauss Center for International Security and Law, welcome to our new outdoor classroom. A little breezy today, but I like the temperature at least. And today's event on the Senate's investigation into Russia's interference in our 2016 presidential election. In recognizing our co-sponsors, the Clements Center and the Strauss Center, I also want to highlight the participation of UT's Global Disinformation Laboratory. The lab is headed by our colleague Kirill Avramov and serves as the research arm for the university's Global Internet, Media, and Disinformation Center. Before I introduce our speaker, let me explain how the event will unfold. You'll be familiar with most of this. Our distinguished guests will deliver remarks on Russia's unwelcome involvement in the 2016 election and the remarkable, and in my view quite consequential, investigation carried out over 2 years by the members and staff of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Now, you'll hear the acronym SISI a great deal today, even though I'm told the committee staff are not very fond of that shorthand. Anyway, after those remarks, I have a handful of questions for our guests. Then we'll open up the floor to your questions. So when we reach that point, just be ready with your question, raise your hand. I'll recognize you. We'll get your microphone, and off we go. Now, this is not necessarily a new topic for us, right? Some of you may recall our National Security Forum in November of 2019 when we hosted SISI Chairman Richard Burr, the Vice Chairman Mark Warner, and Texas's own member of that committee, John Cornyn, and we celebrated and encouraged the committee's bipartisan work on this important national question. But to learn more, today we're joined by Emily Harding. Emily's a fellow and a deputy director of the International Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. Before joining CSIS, Emily was the deputy staff director of the Senate Intelligence Committee and played a leading role in this investigation, as well as the preparation of its 5-volume report. Emily is a professional intelligence officer. She started her career as an analyst at the CIA. She was also a valued colleague of Will Imboden's and mine on the staff of the National Security Council, now several years ago, I confess. With that, please join me in welcoming Emily back to Austin.
I am thrilled to be here. I'm going to attempt to kind of block the wind a little bit and turn this way. That feels great. And I hear everybody I've met in Austin this week has said, oh, it's so much cooler, you're so lucky. So I'm going to take that as a sign that you guys are really happy to have me here, and we all just wanted to sit outside and have a nice party on a beautiful day in Austin, Texas. I appreciate Steve's wonderful introduction. Valued colleagues, I looked up to him and Will so much when I was on the NSC, and I continue to call on them for advice and wise counsel. I'm pleased to be here. If Steve had asked me to come down and flip pancakes, I would have done it. So this is a real thrill for me. Many thanks to the Strauss Center, the Clements Center, and the Intelligence Studies people for hosting this discussion. 2016 seems like a very long time ago. Heck, 2019 seems like a very long time ago in the before times. But in the whirlwind of the last 4 years, some of the lessons, I fear, have gotten lost. It sounds fantastical to say for those of us who are deeply meant to represent, But in 2016, democracy itself was under attack. It's very easy to forget that. Our investigation over the course of 3 years uncovered a sophisticated attempt to make the very source of elections be a question, to question each other and to question democracy as a whole. We've made great strides as a country since then, but we have a lot more work to do still to bolster our democracy. As Steve mentioned, I'm a professional intelligence officer, and analyst habits die very hard. So in a nod to our friends who teach these things, I will hereby give a roadmap for my briefing. First, I will say a few words about the spectacular team that was with me for this whole report. Then I'll talk about the task we faced, why the Senate Intelligence Committee was given this task, and then how we went about it. I will end up with a few key takeaways from the report, some of the things that really got lost in the media frenzy surrounding the allegations about Trump and the Russians, and then also the way ahead. Throughout this talk, you'll hear me say we and our much more than I say I. That's because this project was the work of a truly extraordinary team. I had the privilege and honor of being part of that team. I want to be sure people get to hear this part because it's important. I had the privilege and honor of being part of that team who gave their blood, sweat, and tears to defend democracy. A small and very committed staff under the steady and determined leadership of Chairman Burr and Vice Chairman Warner did a thing that all of Washington thought was going to be impossible. We carried out a comprehensive, clear-eyed, and bipartisan investigation into Russia's attempt to undermine the 2016 election. I fervently wish that entire team was standing up here with me today. We all came to highly value our privacy and to really hope that most folks would not figure out who we were and what we were up to. So I will not name them by name. In fact, I'm going to try to stay away from any kind of identifying details. But at some point in the future, we should have all of us standing up together and talking about the extraordinary work that went on, because this was very much a team effort. During the most challenging days of the investigation, when it seemed like we had pissed off the entirety of Washington, D.C., I recited a constant mantra that this is a legacy project. There was a collective determination amongst all of us to submit a report we could all be proud of, not just today, but in 20 years. The really great stories will wait until my colleagues are up here with me and can share in some of the fun details, but I will say one thing. Many witnesses asked us to identify which of us were Republicans and which are Democrats. They would sit down at the table and say, if you could please introduce yourselves and say which party you're representing. And we say, no, we're not going to do that. We don't play that way. But we told them they were welcome to guess at the end. They could try and figure out who was a Republican and who was a Democrat. I am very pleased to say that not one of them ever got it right. And I think that speaks to the way that we went about our jobs. For me personally, apparently if my hair was up, they guessed I was a Republican, and my hair was down, they guessed I was a Democrat. So today, I don't know, maybe I'm a Democrat. It's back, but not up, whatever. This even-handed approach and dogged determination, along with many late nights, led to 1,000 pages that we really hope make America proud. So a little bit about the task. When we started, it was very different than where we ended up. In January of 2017, the intelligence community published an ICA, Intelligence Community Assessment, assessing Russian activities and intentions in recent U.S. elections. It was a seminal piece. It was a moment in history, and it was our job as the Oversight Committee to basically check the IC's work. We wanted to get deep on the sources that they used. We wanted to read every line in intimate detail. We wanted to talk to the people who put the report together to verify that the judgments were solid, that the evidence was solid. There was no circular reporting or any other things that had dogged the intelligence community in the past. However, shortly after the ICA was published, two things happened. On January the 10th, a series of poorly sourced reports from a private intelligence firm that came to be known as the Steele dossier. This led to a slew of media reports suggesting there may have been inappropriate contacts between representatives of the Russian government and the Trump campaign. If you're interested, there's a section of Volume 5 of our report that goes deep on the Steele dossier and the weakness of some of the sourcing and how that never, ever, ever should have been used or seen the light of day. The second thing that happened was that allegations began to emerge in the press that Mike Flynn had coordinated policy with the Russian ambassador before the inauguration. Again, this was a big media frenzy. The combination of those two things led to a lot of calls for us to vastly expand the scope of our report, past just the ICA and into these new allegations. So, over the next few months, we started to see indications as well that Russia had engaged in a widespread, aggressive social media campaign across platforms to try to sow divisions in American society. And I really do have to give a lot of credit to now Chairman Warner on this issue. Early on, he said, we're going to look into this, it's going to be a big deal. And we were like, propaganda's as old as time, this is not going to be a big deal. Clearly, it was a very big deal, and thanks to his leadership on that one. Also, one paragraph in the ICA led us to start digging into concerns about the security of the elections themselves. And bear with me, I'm just going to read this piece. You know, intelligence officers, they're very specific about their language, so I want to get it right. Russian intelligence accessed elements of multiple state or local electoral boards. Since early 2014, Russian intelligence has researched U.S. electoral processes and related technology and equipment. So if you read that, and then you pause, and then you read that again, you really start to understand the full horror of what the Russians were up to. They weren't just spreading propaganda around. They were attacking the instruments of conducting an election themselves. While the ICA made clear, and our work confirmed, that the systems were not involved in vote tallying, and this is very important. We drilled this home as often as we could. We had never found any evidence that actual votes were changed. This was still highly concerning. And I'll get back down to the findings in a second. But the uniting piece behind all 5 volumes of the report is Russia. How did Russia attempt to interfere in the 2016 elections? It was critical to put the emphasis on the foreign power, to go beyond the press allegations that Trump colluded with Russia. This was a multifaceted Russian campaign to undermine our faith in democracy. So why us? The Senate Intelligence Committee was established in 1976 after the excesses of Watergate and some of the spying on protesters against the Vietnam War. When I wrapped up all of my notes from the investigation and I left the committee, I carried them to the archives that the committee has, and I set them on a shelf, one of the few empty shelves that were left in the archives. And I asked my guide, I was like, is it okay if I just wander around and look for a minute? And she was like, sure, go ahead. And so I walked the aisles and looked at all of the reports and things from my predecessors. And then I got all the way to the beginning, and it's Watergate, it's FBI misbehavior, it's all the things that are lore now, and there they are, just sitting on the shelf. And you can really see the change, pre-Senate Intel existing, post-Senate Intel existing, and the better behavior that exists now that there's much more comprehensive oversight. I was proud to set my boxes down in the same room as all of these other things. CICI also has experience with investigations of sensitive material. There have been 8 investigations in the last 20 years of varying sizes, some more partisan than others. Our investigation included highly classified material and required an understanding of how intelligence work is done. Reading intelligence products takes practice and understanding of sourcing, caveats, the limitations of collection streams, and our staff had those accesses. We understood what we were looking at. On the question of how we went about it, it was very organic. We started off as a small group of people sitting in a room and reviewing documents. And, it's a small group. So you read and you chat and you say, oh my gosh, did you see this? And what about this? And we would just have a conversation about the direction we were headed. But the task is to sit and read documents. We had 10 places to sit and read documents. And some more structure was needed. And we worked really hard to keep it bipartisan the entire time and be sure that we had pairs of people working on all of the issues. People gravitated towards their natural areas of interest. For me, it was a lot of the election systems. I'm a real democracy geek, and so I really wanted to get in deep on the way that voting systems work. What's this machine versus this machine? There were some assignments, but mostly it was people taking on a task because it needed to be done. There was a debate about bringing in professional investigators or former prosecutors onto the team. And there is some benefit to that. I mean, these were people who had understood things like, how to issue a subpoena or when you needed to go deeper on some documents, what kind of tricks you could use to try to get documents out of witnesses. But in the end, our role was never to uncover illegality. That was Bob Mueller's job. What our job was to look at the bigger questions, the way our counterintelligence apparatus works as a country, Russia's strategy, policy recommendations on how a presidential campaign should comport itself. Plus, bringing in outside staffers would have been very slow and very expensive. And when we started, this was going to be a 6-month project. Not so much. And also, just getting those new staffers the clearances they would need and building the trust with the intelligence community was going to be a real challenge. So we decided we were going to stick with what we had and do the best we could. There were disagreements. We were bipartisan the entire time, but that doesn't mean we didn't disagree. Those disagreements were frequently within parties just as often as they were, counter-party. But we talked them through. When we couldn't come to an agreement, we handed it to the chair and the vice chair. They had to make some very hard calls at times, but it was always with an eye towards following the facts and keeping the report bipartisan. A word on process challenges. So I mentioned Mueller and his job versus our job. It was extremely challenging to conduct our investigation at the same time as his investigation was going on. I'm not going to call it a rivalry because I know those are strong words here in Texas, but we were really concerned that we didn't want him to find anything that we didn't find. We wanted to be sure that we were uncovering everything possible. However, FBI declined to share a lot of their information, citing an ongoing investigation. We as a team agreed early on that we did not want to get in the way of actual prosecutions, that was not our goal. If we made a mistake somehow and something got leaked or there was some mistake and it was more difficult to prosecute a criminal, then we would see that as a personal failure. So we were very deferential to the FBI and to Mueller at first. But some of their objections to sharing information began to border on the ridiculous, in particular when Mueller was finished and the timelines extended into the undefined and distant future. These were ongoing investigations that seemed to be ongoing for eternity. And that did make our job much harder. In the end, our report was much more thorough and comprehensive than Mueller's, I am very proud to say. We had a much broader scope, so that's not really a knock on him. Thanks to the dogged determination of some of our team, though, we found things that his team did not. Speaking of the distance between 2016 and now, I'll tell people, I worked on the Hill, and they say, what did you do on the Hill? And I say, I worked for Senate Intel, and we did the Russia report. And they're like, oh, so you worked for Bob Mueller. What's he like? No, this is an opportunity to explain the different branches of government and why the executive branch is different than the... Whatever. Yes, I worked on the Russia report. So a couple points on the findings. I'm going to hit each volume that we did and talk about a critical point from each one. The first volume is most near and dear to my heart because I spent 18 hours a day for many months sitting and writing these things. But the real seminal moment for me with that report was a June 2017 hearing that focused on that one paragraph, the Russian scanning of state and electoral boards. FBI and DHS had seen evidence that Russian elements had scanned about 20 states for vulnerabilities. So we had our first panel with DHS and FBI. And while they were talking, the people who were going to be on the second panel, and that second panel were election professionals along with Dr. Alex Halderman from Michigan. I'm a huge fan of his. Watching the faces of panel 2 while panel 1 was talking was amazing and said everything that you needed to know about the disconnect between these two groups of people in 2017. DHS and FBI thought that they had been in touch with the states. They were testifying completely honestly that they had reached out to people in all of the states and let them know there was a potential threat. The states, on the other hand, had no idea. The definition of contacted varied dramatically between these two groups. Then FBI and DHS in October recontacted the right people in the states to let them know what was going on, and the states were shocked. In the fall of 2017, our investigatory team, did interviews with all 20 states. Most of them were very confused. They thought that they had never been contacted by FBI, or if they had, it went to a couple people in the IT department as opposed to the people who were leading the states. Other states, with a small amount of hubris, said, don't worry, we were sitting there knowing full well that it wasn't and that we needed to be working together much better. The chairman at the time, Chairman Burr, said that he wanted our initial findings to be released by March of 2018 so that we could get out well ahead of the primaries of the 2018 election, thus many, many, many late nights. But we did get the initial findings out, and by the time we published the final report, a lot of work had been done behind the scenes to get these parties to talk to each other, and DHS really get a ton of credit in my book for building relationships, for rebuilding trust, for developing the working relationships they would need to get the states to actually take the cybersecurity choices they had to make to update their voting equipment, all of the things that we've seen play out this year. So volume 2, this was our social media volume. The main takeaway here is that Russia wasn't supporting one candidate or the other per se. What they were doing was trying to get us to fight with each other. Some men just want to watch the whole world burn. They wanted to stand on both sides of every contentious debate and yell fight and get us to scream at each other. They weren't pushing an ideology, they were pushing chaos. The companies have improved quite a bit. One real benefit to us working together was that they started to talk to each other a lot more. Now, Twitter talks to Facebook whenever they see inauthentic material. I met the UT Disinfo Lab this morning. Great work. I'm super excited to see what they're going to do with this, because really digging into the data of what these bad actors are doing is what's going to provide us the answers we need to take the next steps. Volume 3 was on the policy response. This is what the Obama administration did when they were faced with this new challenge. And I have to give a lot of credit to those folks. They sat down and spent hours and hours and hours with our investigatory team and really just laid it all on the table. They were brutally honest. They were self-critical. They wanted us to have the best information possible about what they had done. They told us they felt like they were in an unprecedented situation and had a hard time understanding what was going on, how to respond in the fog of battle. They were very worried about provoking the Russians further. And it wasn't like the election could be moved. They were working to a deadline and trying to figure out who was behind all this information, who was behind all this bad behavior, and then what they could do about it. And they had to do it all before November. The main lesson there is to develop a slate of options before the crisis. They found themselves sort of casting about for things that they could do, for tailored options that would push back on the Russians, and they came up short quite a bit. Volume 4, this was our original task, which was to go and look at the intelligence community assessment and see what the tradecraft was like. And we were pleased to say at the end of it that the IC really did an excellent job under very difficult circumstances. They had a quick turnaround deadline. They were operating in a very political environment. They were dealing with highly classified material and also unclassified material. The structural challenges to writing that paper were significant, and they did an outstanding job. And then Volume 5. Volume 5 is the one that got the most classic Russian influence peddling. The Russians did what a smart intelligence service would do. They looked for access points. We may never know whether the many Russian representatives reaching out to the Trump campaign were under some kind of centralized orders, or whether they just knew cultivating influence would be beneficial for both them and the Kremlin, and they went about doing it under their own behest. But the real lesson is to be skeptical. Campaigns are targets. And with the Trump campaign, you had a group of people who were reasonably new to politics and did not have a good feel for what was normal behavior and what was not. And we saw the Russians really take advantage of that. On what still needs to be done, today we do have safer elections. I fervently believe that. We saw the improvement between 2016 and 2018. We saw additional improvement between 2018 and 2020. 2020 clearly had its own series of challenges, and as soon as it became clear that was not the subject of foreign interference, I kind of said, over to you guys, I'm going to be over here. But the coordination between DHS and the states is night and day different. This money to try to secure their election systems. Many more have moved to paper ballots, and that's critically important. And they are putting in place cybersecurity measures at the state and local level. I think the states understand now that they are a target in a way they never would have thought that before. Another key takeaway, something I've been talking a lot about with students in the last 2 days, more critical thinking classes for middle schoolers. It is going to be vitally important that every single American citizen be on the front lines of the fight against mis and disinformation. They need to be reading with a critical eye, asking questions. What are the sources behind this material? Is it just inflammatory and seeking to get an emotional response out of me? Or is it actually a legitimate assertion? I think the US government is never going to be completely effective at identifying and stopping disinformation. I mean, I'll say we because I served for 20 years. We're big and slow, and everything has to be approved by a bunch of lawyers. So, it's just never going to be agile enough to do a really capable job. But we do need to see countries like Estonia as a model. citizens from Boise to Boston need to be asking questions about what shows up in their Twitter feed. And we've got a lot of good partners in Europe who could help us get there. This is the most wonky thing I'm going to say today, just to warn you. We seriously need to reform FARA, the Foreign Agent Registration Act. This was originally set up in the 1930s to combat Nazi influence in Hollywood. We've evolved since then. There are huge loopholes in this law that allow people who aren't official government representatives to operate and to help those governments and then skate away on technicalities in the end. We've got to really update that one. And the last finding is really the most critical one. And I'm going to read this because it is the highly calculated words of my boss, Senator Burr. He said, one of the committee's most important and overlooked findings is that much of Russia's activities weren't related to producing a specific electoral outcome, but attempted to undermine our faith in democratic process itself. Their aim is to sow chaos, discord, and distrust. Their efforts are not limited to elections. The threat is ongoing. My hope is that this report and the committee's work will provide the American people with more insight into the threats facing our nation and the steps necessary to stop them. And that's why I'm here today, to talk about that and how we need to continue to fight that fight. When we were working very long hours, we all had certain things that kept us going. For me, it was I like democracy more than I like sleep. I would walk out past the wonderful U.S. Capitol Police folks who manned our offices 24/7, and they would be like, geez, how are you going to sleep? Like, I don't know, but I like democracy more than I like sleep. This is more important. The right to choose our leaders is how we started as a nation. We may not agree, but what we have is a system for resolving those disagreements peacefully. It's a republic if we can keep it. We get a chance at renewal with every election, and we have the right to make that decision without a foreign policy or foreign power interfering. So I want to end here with a note of thanks and a note of hope, who shared information with us, who chose to trust us and share with us their tremendous work. To the members who served on our committee, including Texas's own Senator Cornyn, UT Austin's own Senator Sass, and not-so-secret UT Austin fan, Senator Lankford. Chairman Burr, Rubio, and Warner for their exceptional leadership. All three of them had to show true courage in standing up to people in the other party and also in their own party and in really pursuing truth in everything that we did. And finally, to the really remarkable group of staff who came together to be an extraordinary team. I do wish they were here with me today. George Washington said in 1779, when he was low on soldiers and things looked dark, "Where are our men of abilities? Why do they not come forth to serve their country?" For nearly 4 years, a set of those men and women came forth to serve. Their abilities were varied, but they were united in a desire to see this republic heal and endure. Finally, a hopeful note. 2018 was far more secure than 2016. 2022, 2024 can be the most secure with me ever since they were born. I have all the pictures of them with the little future voter stickers. Soon it's going to be their turn to cast a ballot and to carry the torch forward for this great and ongoing experiment that is America. My fervent hope is that they and their entire generation will vote on secure paper ballots with triple backed up offline voter registration, and that they will question every inflammatory, ridiculous tweet. But my most fervent hope is that they vote and that they carry that torch forward. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Horns of a Dilemma, and please don't forget to visit our website at tnsr.org.